Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Dad to Dads podcast. Over the last several months, I've received a lot of messages from listeners asking me to cover domestic violence on men caused by women. And honestly, before the messages, it wasn't even on my radar. But as I started doing some research, I realized that it is, unfortunately, a lot more common than I previously thought. Now, throughout my research, as well as from several of the messages I received, one name kept coming up, and that name is Ann Silvers, who actually wrote a book on the subject titled Abusive Men by Women. It happens, it hurts, and it's time to get real about it. So today, I'm really grateful to welcome Ann Silvers to the podcast. Ann, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Glad to
I
be here.
so much appreciate you coming on. And look, before we dig into the subject, because I know we talked about it, and through my research, it was eye opening. And before we dig into it, though, can you provide just a little background about yourself?
So my first career was medical lab technology. I specialized in microbiology. Did that for 7 years in big hospitals in Canada, a couple of them. And then my second career was being a stay-at-home mom, and I had the chance to have therapy about my childhood.
Huh.
And that was just so groundbreaking for me and life-changing that I decided that when I went back into the paid workforce, I wanted to be a counselor.
Wow.
So then we moved to the US, to Washington State, Seattle area. And when my youngest was in first grade, I went back to school, started over at nothing, and did 11 years part-time to get all the
Wow.
degrees to become a counselor. And one of my degrees was a Bachelor of Science in Psychology at the University of Washington. I did a minor in women's studies at the same time because at that time I was really eager to help raise up women. And
Mm.
I pictured that when I was a counselor, it would be women that I would be mostly working with. And the last assignment, the last class I took in the minor in women's studies was a class on men.
Hmm.
And I didn't get a lot out of the class, but one assignment was choose a book from a list and write, basically write a report about it. And the book I chose was I Don't Want to Talk About It, about male depression, written by Terrence Real. Still out there, available. It opened my eyes to men are struggling, boys are struggling,
Mhm.
and there's a lack of help and a lack of appreciation for those struggles. So I decided, it totally shifted my desire for my focus of my counseling career to, I want to help men. It didn't mean I
Right.
didn't want to also help women, but I wanted to help men. And didn't know how that would manifest. And over the years, it's shown up in different ways. And one was that early, like within a couple of years of me starting my private practice, I had a male friend who was telling me his stories about being abused by his wife. And I was minimizing it. Um, and until it was like, no, this is really happening. This is self evident. And that opened my eyes. And it's like when your eyes are open, you then can see something you never saw before.
Mhm.
I was always glazing it over. Um, and so I began talking about it. Men came out of the woodwork to tell me their stories, and I had nowhere to send them. The resources were not even not helpful, they were harmful
Mm.
because they would give lip service to, oh, it can happen to men too. But now all the examples are bad man, good woman. And
Mhm.
so an abused man who's already confused about what's happening to me is going to look at that and think, oh, yeah, I must be doing something wrong here. Or have that sense of go back into the shadows and that isolation and that I must be a freak because this is happening to me, but it must not be happening to other men. So I wrote the book.
Okay, so that's what compelled you to write that book. That was going to be one of my questions, and that book has been such a so life changing to so many people. I mean, I really have, and really, it's one of the somebody had connected us who has read the book and also has gone to you, and you know, it, the reviews are outstanding on the book as well. So, for the men, thank you for doing that. Now, tell me this: how has it been received?
Mixed. So I knew when I wrote it. Okay. And
But isn't it like a global bestseller? Isn't it?
well, I don't know about bestseller, but I'm definitely internationally known for it.
Yeah,
And
that's pretty impressive.
thank you. I'm pleased with that. Uh, and when I published it in 2014. It took me 3 years to write it. And by the way, the title is Abuse of Men by Women. Often, so I real and of I capitalize,
You did,
uh,
yeah.
because even when I was saying the title, and I noticed it when you said it, Robert, that the abuse of gets slurred together and it sounds like abusive. And so I
Oh,
would say abuse of men by women without stressing the of so much, and people would think I was talking about abusive men
abusive. Okay,
because
yeah,
that's what we're geared towards. Where
that's what
people,
we hear.
yeah, yeah.
Wow,
Um, yeah,
that
so I
makes
mean,
sense
it's
then.
actually known because there's only a handful of, well, it's a good book, but there's also only a
Obviously,
handful of books on the topic. But it has grown in the last several years in particular. The topic is grown in popularity. There's more people willing to look at it. There's more men coming forward. Uh, and I think the Johnny Depp trial had a lot to do with that, where
yeah. I was wondering. I was thinking about that the other day with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. That was wow. That was interesting. And we were led one way, and then once he gets on there, it was like, okay, wow, it's totally different. I think that maybe opened the doors for some men to feel more comfortable to come out and talk about the
almost
abuse
definitely.
and to accept or to recognize that they're actually being abused. So that in and of itself is what I wanted to ask you. What is considered domestic violence?
And it's such a great question. I'm really glad that you posed this because um, I have a frustration over this conflation of partner abuse and domestic violence. So, partner abuse, there's 7 forms. Let's see if I can name them.
Yeah.
Physical, which we talk about very often. Verbal, we talk about that one a lot too. Um, Sexual, financial, legal, or administrative, sometimes it's called. Spiritual, and psychological slash emotional, I
Hmm.
call. So all of those are partner abuse, but not all of them deserve, and all of them happen to men from women, but not all of them uh, should be called domestic violence. So to me, physical and some sexual would be what deserves that DV moniker. But what's happening lately is that people are growing what they're calling DV that'll get you a protection order against you and get you kicked out of your house and unable to see your kids. Uh, Things that don't deserve to be in that category of danger are getting thrown in there.
Wow, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. That's interesting though. And hopefully, what is considered DV for one is considered for the other. What's considered for a female is considered for the male. I know it's probably not always looked at it that way,
Oh,
but
no, 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 not at all. It should be.
it should be, but it's not.
Yeah.
So, and we'll go into that in a minute. Okay. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you is how common is it? Because, you know, when I was looking, and I can't remember the site I was looking at, it was something like 1 in 4 women will experience it and 1 in 8 men or something like that. It was really, the disproportionate, it seemed like. How common is it? Do you believe it's underreported? And if it is, if you do believe that, why do you believe it is?
So there are different stats coming out. So 1 in 8, let's talk about that one for a minute. Okay, let's imagine that's the minimum for men, because I believe the number is much bigger than that. But let's
Oh,
imagine
wow.
1 in 8 is the minimum. Well, that's still 1 in 8.
Yeah.
That's a lot more than nothing,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the reality is it's actually 1 in 2 lifetime. It's the same number for men as it is for women. And why I
Cool.
say that's the real number is because that's the number when you're looking at general population. And this is the number that the CDC has come out with. And this is like 3 reports in a row. First one 2010-ish, then 2017. The last one was 2022, and it's based on a national survey, like a crime survey, a crime and violence survey, phone survey, where people are going to be more likely to be truthful on the phone,
Mhm.
and depends on how the question is asked, what kind of answer you get, and it depends on the population you're going after. That is going to greatly affect the stat. So when you see 1 in 8, that's because the domestic violence community is coming up with that. And that's a closed system that is already declared it really doesn't happen to men. It's happening to women. And so they're testing their own subset of the population, and they come up with that kind of number. Some of them would come up with 0 because they don't believe that domestic violence can happen against men. They excuse it away, but they excuse violence against men by women away and don't call it DV.
That that definitely answered also my next question, or partly why are men often so overlooked as victims of domestic violence? But I think there's probably a little bit more to that. Are men admitting or recognizing? Do
Yeah.
you mind kind of going into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll go into that, and I'll step back and give you some more stats too.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love stats.
Okay. All right. So, and I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, and this is all from the 2022 CDC report, and so it's 1 in 2 men, 1 in 2 women for psychological aggression from an intimate partner, physical violence, same ratio, physical violence by an intimate partner, same ratio for contact sexual violence, comma, physical violence and or stalking.
So
Same.
50%.
50% lifetime. Okay.
Jeez.
Now let's look at last 12 months. More men reporting physical violence from an intimate partner in the last 12 months than women. This was 2022's report based on a couple of years earlier survey.
And this is from CDC?
This is from CDC.
Okay.
So it was 1 in 22 women, 1 in 18 men.
Wow.
The last year. And then, people want to excuse it away and say, well, it's not as bad. It's not as severe. But same report, severe physical violence in the last year, 1 in 33 for men, same for women. So this
Wow.
is happening. And then, it's not the only, I've got a blog post about stats, and I go into, we've known since the 1980s that it happens to men at about equal rates to women, but they've squashed. There's louder voices saying, no, don't look over here, look over here.
Because it doesn't fit the narrative.
It doesn't fit the narrative, right? So on annsilvers.com, no E on Ann, if you put in, I checked it, if you put in how many men into my search bar, you'll get the post about how many men are abused by women.
What is behind it? I mean, I guess what is behind all abuse, right? But what is behind, if we're talking about, our subject is men being abused by women. What is behind that?
I have a list of 72 reasons why.
I'm not going to ask you to. Are they on your site?
They're on my site, and
Okay.
I think you have to look up like why do women abuse men, and
Okay.
it's basically a parallel, similar list for why do men abuse women. So there's only a couple of changes where one one reason. So the reasons are it can be the mental illness on
Hmm.
the person's part. Um, it could be like anxiety can drive a lot of survival kind of knee jerk reactions in people that end up violent or abusive. And when I'm talking about the 72 reasons, I am talking about all forms of partner abuse because
Yeah.
and my book talks about all 7 forms of partner abuse. It could be mental illness. It could be the way somebody was raised. Maybe somebody's raised abused, and so they learn that. It could be the opposite. Somebody could be raised and put on a pedestal, so they expect everybody to bow down to them, and they get very angry when a partner doesn't give in to their whims. Let's say it could be a personality disorder, which is different than a mental illness. So
Hmm.
borderline personality disorder, narcissism, um, those sorts of things. It could be lack of skill, so they don't know how to communicate well, and or other kinds of things in that kind of category. It could be physical illness, um, like a traumatic brain injury. We see that with former football players. They can become violent, and we can trace it back to like brain injuries. So that's sort
It
of
is
touching.
it you kind of when you were given the numbers, I wanted to ask, do you feel like it's increasing and will continue to increase? So I look at some of the people today, and I feel like younger generation. I hate to be one of those people that always talks down about the younger generation, but that's where I am right now. But I feel like the younger generation, when I'm around them a lot, I feel like they don't have a lot of emotional control. You see that whether it's and also coping skills as well.
Which I mean, why I wrote my most recent book, which is called Building Skills to Up Level Life, and it's emotional and relationship skills, and it's a workbook. Because I think that a key to better personal life and relationships and even healthier communities is emotional intelligence. And there's skill to be gained there. And it could make a lot of positive changes.
That makes sense. So let me ask you this: so a man is in, and this can happen to any man. I mean, it doesn't have to be, some 110-pound weakling. I mean, I know people that have been abused, and I know one guy who's 6'4", 6'5", probably two. Well, when it was happening, he's probably a little bit larger now. But when it was happening, he was in really good shape and was probably about 220. Um, and the person that was abusing him was maybe 5'2", 110 pounds, dripping wet. So it can happen to all men. So,
Yeah, because there's ways that women can overcome size disadvantage. And I have a blog post about this also, and there's 5 ways, and of course I cover it in the book. But one way is that we do a good job of training guys from boyhood. Don't hit girls.
right.
Now, unfortunately, we're not doing the parallel for girls. We're not teaching girls don't hit boys, don't hit your partner, and that's what it should be. Don't hit. um, is some teaching, but we girls, females can take advantage of the don't hit girls, and so that can be one reason why a small woman can get away with hitting. I mean, I've worked with lots of big guys who have been pounded on by women, kicked, choked, all kinds of things. Um, and they relied on that he won't hit her. One man put his hands in his back pockets so he would not hit back. He tried to hide one time under the kids' bunk beds and couldn't fit underneath, trying to get away from her. Another way that they overcome the size disadvantage is surprise attacks. So attacking in their sleep, attacking them when they're inebriated, or jumping on. I had one guy, she would jump on his back and scratch his face, or when they're in a position of not being able to defend themselves, like when they're driving. So she's in the passenger side, he's driving. She may take advantage of that and try and hit him, or she might take control of the steering wheel and attempt to drive them off the road. They can use objects to overcome their size disadvantage. So throwing things, you can throw, you know, pop can at a guy's head from a distance, and it's gonna hurt. Also, the use of knives or guns, obviously, cars, frying pans,
Cell phones.
cell phones.
Everybody has a cell phone in their hand.
Yeah. Um, those are the ones that I think that's only three, and I know that I have a list of five, so I can't remember.
Let me ask you this. This just popped in my head. False accusations. Is that, I'm thinking about an instance where, well, go back. Look at the Amber Heard trial, the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. Is that common where a female will, when she's guilty of violence to the male, where she'll even threaten false accusations, or where she'll follow through with them?
Yes, both very, very common and probably growing. You asked before about, is the number growing? But remind me to come back to false accusations, but I want to also take the opportunity to say I've seen some stat where the DV against females is decreasing and against males is increasing. And that makes sense to me, because I think culturally we get it. Men should not be hitting women. We get it. We've been talking about this for 50 years.
I've pounded it in my son's head. I mean, yeah. They know you.
So it's also important to train your boys. Don't take it from a woman either. Like, it's not that, and so then there's a whole plan around what do you do if this happens, because you can't just simply fight back. And, but there's things that you need to be able to do. So, and we have so much culturally going on that is sending the message, it's okay for women to hit men. It's in our romantic comedies, it's in commercials. When companies are trying to sell a product and they've got violence against men right in the commercial.
You're right.
And there's a lot of demeaning of males in commercials. Again, they think that sells their product, for a woman to be talking down to a man. There's the whole cultural thing about women get to slap men. They get applauded. It's kind of you go girl kind of stuff. Women get to throw men's stuff out on the lawn. And it's all okay and applauded culturally. From my perspective, none of it's okay. None of it should be applauded.
No, it's not.
And it shouldn't be laughed at. It's not funny. If we went back to the 1950s, we'd be able to see shows where, like the Honeymooners, it used to be a whole running gag in the Honeymooners where he was Jackie Gleason was going to hit his wife. To the Moon, Alice was this big running gag. Well, that was violence against women being made fun of. You wouldn't have that anymore. But you have the opposite. You have the gag is the woman hitting the man. And not only hitting him, but hurting him. So there's a movie, I appreciate the movie for a lot, except for this piece. And it's called, I don't think I'm going to remember the name. Anyway, I'm not going to remember the name. But what's happening is Kate Hudson hits Matthew McConaughey with a golf club. And you know that her hitting him with the golf club has hurt him badly.
Mhm.
but it's funny. I don't find it funny, but it's in there for comedy because culturally, that's where we're at. That this is funny.
And I feel so bad because as a guy, I even dismiss that. I we've just become so accustomed to it. I overlook that and don't think anything about it, which is wrong. Let's go back to false accusations.
Yes, yes. Oh, it's they are devastating to the men that it happens to. There's a lot of buy-in that's quick when a woman renders a false accusation. I think we're in a slightly improved place. Again, the Johnny Depp thing, Amber Heard took things so far and was so exposed for her lies in the end that it killed the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement did not start out, the founder's intention was not believe all women, but it got hijacked and that's what it became. And so we went through that long phase, and we're not out of it by any stretch, but it is, and the cracks are forming. But the idea that we believe all women and we disbelieve all men was a setup for false accusations being a fast road for any malicious woman to get what she wants. And it's been a fast road to get men kicked out of their house, get them to not have time with their children, go through really like what I would actually call brutal domestic violence training classes that are geared around you're a man, so you're bad,
Hmm.
and having to present like you are remorseful for this DV that you never did. And if you won't say, I'm a bad man and I did this bad thing, you never get out of the loop of having to take the DV class and get to see your kids. Um, I'm sure that there's good DV classes out there. No, I'm hopeful that there's good DV
Good
classes
luck.
out, but there's also a lot of really bad ones
Yeah.
that are shaming men who don't deserve it. And shaming men is not going to be how you get them to change, even if they do deserve the the label of being a domestic. As one man called it, domestic violencer.
I received a message over the weekend from a gentleman, and he said that his future ex-wife, they're going through the divorce process, and said that his future ex-wife is threatening to say that he had been violent with her, that he had committed domestic violence, and she was threatening him, and so it would help her with custody. And he said, I've never laid a hand on her, never once, not so much as even held her up against the wall. And he said, but who are they going to believe? They're going to believe her. What do I do? And I asked him if he had an attorney, and said that would be, I thought that would be the best step. But I also told him that you and I were speaking in a few days and that our episode would be out soon. And so maybe you can kind of provide advice for somebody in that situation.
It is brutal. It's brutal because the false accusations get taken too seriously. It's brutal because they're getting you right at your values. Men, good men, don't want to be in that category
Mm-hmm.
of being hurting women. It goes against their core. And to be accused of that falsely is hurting you to your core. And then there's all those repercussions of potentially not getting to see your kids, and that leads to more and more devastation. Uh, the
And Ann, let me
suicide
interrupt
rate.
you for a minute. One of the things he had said that I can't believe I left this out. He said and she's regularly violent with me every time she doesn't get her way.
Right.
And he said, I've had scratches on my face, I've been hit, I've been bruised. I can't remember what he said. She chased with the, what do you guys use for curling your hair?
Curling
With
iron.
with like a curling iron.
Oh,
I don't think that's what he called it, but anyway, that she's chased him with that and tried to hit him with that.
yeah.
And he said, which is horrible.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And the same person then that abused him is going to take this other form of abuse. So this is called not legislative, legal. I call it legal abuse in the book. I've seen more recently the title administrative abuse. So it's extending the arm of the abuser by engaging the justice system in that further abuse. And it works way too often. I want to mention that while the suicide rate for all men is terrible, so it's 1 in 4 suicides are male. No, 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 I got that wrong. 3 out of 4, 3 out of 4 suicides are male. So, 80% of suicides are male in the US, in Canada, in English speaking countries, in a large part of the world. This has been going on for a long, long time, that most suicides are male. The suicide rate for divorced dads it's way
Yeah.
higher than divorced moms.
It's
And
tremendous.
so
I have the facts. I also have a cheat sheet. Let me see if I have it on
do you have
here.
it
I
for
don't have
divorced
it on
moms
that.
and divorced dads?
Um, and I usually know that, or can recite that, but it is tremendously higher for divorced dads
Yeah,
than anybody else in the population,
yeah.
or than
And
for divorced moms.
right. So
So
in terms of what somebody should do in
right.
that situation, if you're in a state that is a single person can give the okay for recording, definitely attempt to record that person, because that would be gold if you had it in your case. If you are a two-person consent or two-party consent state, then check in with a lawyer, because I think there's exceptions to that.
Mhm.
Like if somebody is trying to pull fraud over you, I think that you can get around the two-person consent, but I'm not sure. I'm not giving legal advice.
Mhm.
So that's something to look into. Can you record it? Um, and uh, try to see if there's people who will, write declarations for you. That might help. Uh, and I have to tell you that it's tough. It's very, very tough to
Yeah.
win these things.
It's a lot harder for a man to prove than a female.
Very much so, because the cultural leaning is women tell the truth, men lie.
Yeah.
Also, the cultural leaning is kids need their mom and they don't need
Mhm.
their dad so much, which is wrong.
Yeah.
And statistics say it's wrong. And
Yeah.
that's the sort of thing you probably talked about before. But um, yeah.
So let me ask you this. Why do men stay in these relationships if they're getting abused?
Well, when we're looking at 1 and 2, a lot of those people aren't staying, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of those relationships they are getting out of. And so that's good. And it'd be good to get out of these relationships early, especially like if you're a guy and you're getting hit and you don't have any kids, move on, get out.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you've got kids, you're in a whole different ball game. And just like you're the person you spoke to, I think you said on the weekend, who
Mm-hmm.
now these false accusations and the threat that that I think if I remember correctly, it involved kids.
Right.
So you're this woman who has proved herself to be abusive physically can also be likely to abuse you legally, to abuse you financially, and all these other ways, because it's like that wall has been broken down. And why do they stay? Okay, so the ones that do stay, there's a long list again. It's not one reason. And it's a similar list for why women stay as why men stay. And then there's some things that are particular to men or women. So why anybody stays, you might stay because of fear of losing relationship with your kids, or fear of leaving your kids with that partner and not being around. It could be economics, feeling like, we can't afford a two household family. Women might stay because they're not the earner, but men might stay because they are the earner and they feel like they can't manage two households with their finances. Or they might even be not the earner, or not the higher earner, and they can't see their way out economically. It can be cultural in terms of, first of all, guys thinking this is not really happening to me. The culture's telling me this doesn't happen, so this is not really happening. Um, the guy that I mentioned who would put his hands in his back pockets to not hit his wife, who was beating on him and would kick him and do all kinds of physical things. He'd been enduring that for years, and he went to work one day with a black eye, and a coworker asked him about it, and he made up an excuse like people do when they have
Mm-hmm.
bruises on their face from DV. And the coworker said, "No, I'm not buying it." And then the guy said, "Well, my wife hit me," and the coworker said, "You're an abused man." And until that coworker, another guy, said to him, "You're an abused man," it never crossed his mind that that's what was happening to him. He was, you go numb. That's another thing. You go
Yeah.
numb when you've got all of this to deal with. And it's not a stretch for men to go numb, because part of male training is don't feel.
Right.
Uh, and that's another thing that in particular keeps men there. They can also potentially stay because they're overly focused on some qualities that are good in there's a healthy zone of good, but then there's a too much position that they're in. So they may be overly forgiving, overly compassionate, overly perseverant, and overly tolerant and accepting of bad behavior.
What about shame or
So
embarrassment?
that's some
What about shame
definitely
or
shame and
embarrassment?
embarrassment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot
You
of
know,
guys will stay because of that, and particularly guys. So
mhm.
women who are abused might stay for the same reason, but men have this extra thing about, you're a guy, you're supposed to be able to fix things. Why can't you fix this? You're a guy, you're bigger. How can this be happening to you? And if it is, it can't possibly hurt, which again is wrong. It hurts to be hit, and lots of women can hit their partner with force. And I described, how they get away with that. Um, Definitely shame and embarrassment is
since
back.
our initial conversation about a week ago, I reached out to somebody that I knew who had been in a relationship like this, and I asked him, "Why did you stay?" And he said through the shame and embarrassment. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, can you tell me a little bit more about that?" They're not together anymore, but I said, "Can you tell me a little bit more about that?" And he said that while it was happening, and if he got upset or telling her to stop, that he said it was very emasculating, that she would call him names and, "What? You're a man. You can't take this. I'm a female. This can't be hurting." And, things like that. He said, and so I was embarrassed,
Right.
just shame for even admitting that. Now, they didn't get divorced for that reason. It was another reason they ended up getting divorced. But I imagine that plays a good bit into it as well. The shame, embarrassment, admitting it.
Right. So that's why this is so important. It was why it was important for me to write the book, why it's
Yeah.
important for you to have this conversation talked about, because we have to get it out there that this is common. And the guys that is happening to, they're not freaks. You're not
No.
less than because this is happening to you. It's something to do with what's going on for her.
So let me ask you this: warning signs. You talked about for those of us that are maybe outside of that. Are there warning signs? You mentioned a black eye. Are there things that we can look for that somebody else, that another male might be getting abused?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say the first thing is take their stories seriously. Now, I'm not going to say believe all men because I don't think you
Right.
should just believe everybody, but you're friends with somebody or you're a relative to somebody, you know them. Don't discount their stories because men are likely to just put their toe in the water and tell a little bit something. So when you've educated yourself about abuse of men by women happens, you can be more likely to not shut that person down. So, for example, one interview I did was on radio, and the radio guy said that his brother had come to him multiple times over a span of years about his wife beating him up, and the radio guy, discounted it every time until finally, a last time, and I don't remember what made the difference for him. Finally, he heard him, and he was being beaten by his wife. So, as guys, it's really important to be educated about this so you can be supportive of other men who this is happening to and not just discount them and minimize it.
That is really good because as we were talking about, I think we do discount things and we don't listen. And as a man, when we do open up, it is, as you said, we stick our toe in the water. And if we're not heard, we pull it back.
Exactly. And then another
And
thing, another
go
thing I
ahead.
want to mention
Hmm?
is that also often abused men are in the state of minimizing it themselves, and so be a little bit cautious about getting ahead of them. And so again, you're kind of putting your toe in the water on
Yeah.
what can they handle because they may completely back away from you if you're saying, "Hey, man, this is not good. What's happening to you?" And he might minimize it, and so if he's there minimizing it, just be careful. You might have to hang in there with him. It can be hard to be around somebody you care about who's being abused right in front of you. I mean, it can be the way she talks down to him or belittles him or something like that. And you make decisions about, can I be around them when they're present as a couple? Um, and sometimes it takes a while for the awakening, and then it's it's great if you cannot take it too personally if they didn't believe you when you were trying to help them earlier and they weren't ready for the help. Um, have an open
That,
door when they come around and they're like, I get it now.
no, that's great. That's great advice. What have we missed? What else? I know we've missed a lot. We've covered it kind of 30,000 feet, but
Yeah. Well, there's a lot more to be said, and that's why the book made it to like 350 pages. And people can poke around on my website. There's lots and lots of posts on there.
that's
Uh,
that's what I was going to ask you. How can your website is full of information. Your book again is Abuse of Men by Women. It happens. It hurts. It's time to get real about it. But how else can people find you?
so on my website, annsilvers.com, no E on Ann. I used to be really active in Twitter. I'm there at Ann Silvers, and I'll keep dabbling in it, but
You're also on Instagram as well, correct?
I am. I'm not that active, but I'll get more active on there
Yeah.
probably. So it
Yeah.
wouldn't be a bad
And
idea
I'll
to.
tag, I will, for anybody listening, I will put your website information on there. We'll also tag you with Instagram as well,
Okay,
so people
great.
can find a way to reach out to you. Now, let me ask you this about your practice. It's not just face to face. Like, you can work with people all over, correct?
Yes. So I do video chat, and I do voicemail, not voicemail, voice calls. Now, out of Washington State is people have to recognize I'm only licensed in Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to be very upfront about that, and people have to know that. And I also recognize that there are not many people. I mean, there's no one in the country that I have to turn to say, no, I can refer you to this person. So I think that that gives me some protection with like licensing boards and ethics, to be able to say, if you've got this niche um, need, then you can reach out to me.
Okay.
And there's a contact form on my website, so that's a good way to reach me.
And again, I'll post the link as well with this. But Ann, I so much appreciate you coming on and talking about this very important subject that it was eye opening to me. I mean, it truly was. And when you start talking the numbers, the stats, um, it's sad, really, but it's extremely eye opening. It's something I never would have imagined. But I appreciate you taking time out of your day coming on. And I thank you for the book as well, because obviously it has had a huge impact on numerous people out there. And because I get messages, and I also think that, there's several that don't even message me about that are experiencing this. And, for your book, your name and your book to continue to come up, I thank you for writing that. I really do. And for bringing a spotlight to this subject.
Well, I appreciate the thanks, because I do need some pats on the back every once in a while to overcome the people who don't like that I'm talking about this. So it's
Oh, I
really
know. Look, I get it all the time. And people thinking that I'm anti-mother. And so on a lot of podcasts, I always make the disclaimer, I'm very pro-mom. I have a great relationship with my mom. I think moms are extremely important, but I also think dads are important as well. And but yes, I get the hate messages and hate emails and all that with that. But look, thank you, and thank you so much for coming on, and I really do appreciate that. And again, I will post your information for anybody that wants to get in touch with you. And the website again is annsilvers.com, and that's Ann without an E, and that's Silvers with the S at the end of it. So, but again, I'll post that. So, Ann, thank you for coming on and spending some time with us. And thank you all for listening to the Daddy Dads podcast. You can find us on Spotify or Apple Podcast, as well as on YouTube and Instagram. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. And we'll see you all next time.